park at midnight. There's something about being 17 that makes you believe you're invincible. You stay out too late. You sneak past curfews. You wander places you know you probably shouldn't. And you do it all because you're young enough to genuinely believe that nothing bad can ever happen to you. The world feels enormous and electric and full of possibility. Danger is something that happens to other people, in other places, in news stories you scroll past on your way to something more interesting. I was exactly that kind of kid. And there was a park 2 blocks from my house in Westerville, Ohio, that came very close to proving me wrong. Her name was Maya. We were both seniors at Westerville Central High, a suburban school in a town so quiet and unremarkable that the biggest local news event most years was something like the annual Pumpkin Festival or a debate about whether to repave the bike path along the creek. The kind of place where crime felt theoretical, where danger felt like something from somewhere else. Maya and I had been circling each other all through junior year in that particular way teenagers do. Lots of eye contact across classrooms, lots of conversations that started about homework and ended somewhere else entirely, lots of deliberate walking the same direction after school, even when it wasn't exactly on either of our ways home. She was the kind of person who took up space in a room without trying to. She laughed too loud and didn't apologize for it. She wore the same oversized army jacket almost every day and had her dark hair pulled up in a knot that looked like it might fall apart at any second, but somehow never did. She had opinions about everything: music, teachers, the layout of the school cafeteria, the inherent injustice of assigned seating. And she delivered all of them with absolute certainty, like she'd thought through each position carefully and had simply arrived at the correct answer. She was a pot smoker. This wasn't exactly a secret at school. It wasn't my thing. I tried it once at a party sophomore year and spent the rest of the evening convinced I was dying, which did not leave a strong desire to repeat the experience. But Maya had this way of making anything seem reasonable when she was the one suggesting it. And when a girl like Maya messages you at 11:30 p.m. and says, "Come out, let's hang," the correct response is not to launch into a detailed explanation of your personal hesitations. I lived close enough to walk to her street. Right across from her house was Clover Ridge Park, a neighborhood park that was genuinely nice by suburban Ohio standards. A wooden play structure with multiple levels and a tube slide, a swing set, a paved path that curved around a small field, a cluster of picnic tables off to the east side, and along the entire back edge, a thick row of mature oak trees that formed a kind of natural wall, deep enough that it blocked the streetlights completely, dense enough that you felt genuinely hidden inside it. During the day, Clover Ridge was exactly what you'd expect. Little kids on the swings, parents on the benches, a couple of dogs being walked in slow loops around the perimeter. Normal. Completely and utterly normal. At night, it was ours. Maya would message me on her laptop. This was 2006, just before the era when every single person on Earth had a smartphone tucked into their pocket, and we'd slip out and meet at the park around midnight. Sometimes we'd sit on the swings. Sometimes we'd climb up to the second level of the play structure and sit on the platform with our legs hanging over the edge. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing, about college applications and whether they even mattered, about which teachers we'd actually miss and which ones we'd forget by December, about what we imagined our lives might look like in 10 years if things went right, and what we were afraid of if they didn't. Sometimes she convinced me to smoke. I got marginally better at it over the course of the fall. She still laughed at me, but it felt more affectionate than mocking by then. The park felt safe in the way that places feel safe when you're young, and nothing has happened yet to teach you that they aren't. The oak trees along the back created a genuine sense of enclosure. Standing in the middle of the playground at night, you couldn't see the street, and from the street, you couldn't see us. It felt private. It felt like a space that belonged to us in some informal but real way, the way teenagers claim small pieces of the world and call them their own. So when Maya messaged me on a Friday night in late October at 11:52 p.m. and said, "Park, now, bring your flashlight," I pulled on my heaviest hoodie, grabbed the small LED flashlight I kept on my nightstand, and slipped out through the back door. She was there when I arrived, sitting cross-legged on the top of the picnic table closest to the tree line, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. She'd brought a blanket from somewhere and had it draped over her shoulders like a cape. We sat there for a while and talked about nothing much. The air had that particular smell of late October in Ohio, dry leaves and cold dirt, and something faintly smoky from someone's chimney a few blocks away. At some point, Maya slid off the table, stretched her arms above her head until her back cracked, and looked at me with that expression. That particular, slightly unhinged, completely confident expression that meant she just decided we were going to do something she'd invented 30 seconds ago. "Hide and seek," she said. I stared at her. "We're 17, I said. 18 in March, she said, as if this were a relevant rebuttal. Go count. I know how this sounds. Two almost adults playing children's games in a public park at midnight. But here's the thing about Maya. When she decided something was happening, it happened. There was no version of that conversation that ended with us not playing hide and seek. So I walked over to the tree line, pressed my forehead against the rough bark of one of the big oaks, and counted to 30, out loud, like a child. When I turned around, the park was empty, or at least it appeared to be. I started with the picnic tables. Nothing. Then I moved toward the playground, my flashlight sweeping in wide arcs across the wood-chip mulch that surrounded the base of the structure. The play structure at Clover Ridge was one of those multi-level setups. A lower platform accessible by regular steps, a middle platform connected by a rope bridge, and at the top, a higher enclosed deck with a dome-shaped clear plastic panel full of small holes, the kind kids press their faces against to look out, like they're in a submarine or a spaceship or something. I was lazy. I'll admit that. I did not immediately climb up to check the top platform. Instead, I stood at the edge of the mulch and pointed my flashlight upward, sweeping it across the higher sections of the structure, thinking, if she's not visible, I'll bother climbing. And that's when I saw it. Through the small circular holes in the dome panel at the very top of the structure, I could see something. Not nothing. Something. The edge of dark fabric. A pale curve that might be skin. And then one eye, one single unmistakable human eye, peering down through one of the holes directly at me. I almost called her name. Almost. But something shifted in my brain at the last second. Some small mischievous signal. And instead I had a different idea. I would mess with her. I kept the flashlight moving in a casual, uninterested arc, like I hadn't seen anything at all. I let the beam drift away from the dome. I made a show of shrugging and turning toward the picnic tables, as if I'd given up on the playground and was moving on to search the rest of the park. I could picture her up there, watching me through those holes, barely breathing, thinking she had me completely fooled. Here was my plan. Walk to the picnic tables, circle back through the tree line, come up around the far side of the playground, climb up from behind, and appear at the top of the dome to scare her so thoroughly she'd talk about it for weeks. I crossed the mulch and stepped onto the grass, which was cold and a little damp with frost. I walked to the picnic tables. I clicked off my flashlight. The darkness that came down around me was immediate and complete. I stood still for a moment, letting my eyes start to adjust, then began moving back toward the playground, stepping carefully, testing each footstep before putting my weight down. No sudden crunches, no breaking sticks, as quiet as I could be on the autumn grass. I made it to the edge of the wood chips surrounding the playground base. I slowed down. I was probably 10 feet from the first platform of the structure. Something grabbed my arm. I screamed. Fully and without any dignity. Not a small, controlled intake of breath, but a genuine full-volume scream that echoed across the empty park and almost certainly disturbed multiple sleeping households on the surrounding streets. Then I heard Maya's laughter. Uncontrolled, doubled-over laughter. The kind that involves genuine physical struggle to breathe. She had come down from wherever she was hiding while I was walking to the picnic tables, and she had circled around and come up behind me in the dark and grabbed me at exactly the moment I thought I was about to scare her. The prank backfired, completely and spectacularly. When I could breathe again, we climbed up together to the second platform, our usual spot, and I asked her if she'd known I spotted her through the dome holes at the top. She looked at me. Her expression changed. "I wasn't in the dome," she said. "I was behind the slide the whole time." Silence. And then in that silence, we both became aware of something we'd been subconsciously filtering out for most of the night. A series of small, soft, irregular sounds, creaking sounds. The kind of sounds that old wood and metal make in the wind. Except there wasn't any wind. "What is that?" Maya said. I pointed the flashlight upward, to the dome, to the top platform. Ahead. Shoulders. Someone hunched forward over the railing of the platform above us, completely motionless, visible only in the edge of the beam. Not moving, not speaking. Just there. Just present. And from directly below the platform we were sitting on, from the wood chips at the base of the structure, footsteps. Someone walking through the mulch, slow and deliberate. I didn't think. I grabbed Maya's hand and I ran. I clicked the flashlight off as we hit the grass. Instinct, the sudden awareness that I didn't want us to be a visible, trackable light in the dark. And we sprinted across the road to her house. She had her key. We let ourselves in through the front door, went straight to her room on the second floor, and she pulled the curtains closed without turning on any lights. I sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a long time, listening to the silence outside. I stayed until morning. I took the long way around the park on my way home. We never went back at night. Not once. Not even in the spring when the weather got nice again, and we talked about going back just to prove it had been nothing. We never went back. I've thought many times since then about what we must have looked like to the person or people in that park. 2 teenagers, regular visits, predictable schedule, always at midnight, always with flashlights, always talking at normal volume. How long had someone been watching us before that night? How many evenings had we been there, completely certain we were alone, while someone sat in the dark above us and listened? I have no way of knowing. That's the part I find hardest to set down. The red light. Ask any adult to close their eyes and travel back to the single scariest moment of their childhood. Not the nightmare kind of scary, not the monster under the bed or the dark hallway variety, but the kind that was real. The kind where you understood, on some level you couldn't articulate at the time, that something was actually wrong. The kind that 30 or 40 years later still hits you with the same cold jolt it did the first time. Everyone has one. This one is mine. I grew up in Marietta, Georgia. My family lived in a quiet subdivision off the main road, a cul-de-sac with 8 houses, all built around the same time, all with similar landscaping and similar driveways and similar smells coming from the grills on Friday evenings. The kind of neighborhood that shows up in real estate listings as family-friendly, and actually means it. My mother was a school librarian. She drove a green station wagon, older, slightly battered, with a back seat full of reusable grocery bags and books. She was going to return to the library and never quite did. She was the kind of parent who was present in the way that really matters. She came to things. She paid attention. She knew my friends' names and their parents' names and what was going on in each of their lives. She wasn't distracted or absent. She was a good, attentive mother. And she still almost lost me at a playground in broad daylight with dozens of other parents 20 feet away. On weekends, she took me to Heritage Park, a large public park about 2 miles from our house, with a particularly impressive playground that I absolutely loved. When I say impressive, I mean it. The main play structure was enormous, built almost entirely from heavy-duty wood and plastic, covering an area probably 100 feet in each direction. It had towers and bridges and covered tunnels and fireman poles and a rock-climbing wall along one side. On a busy Saturday in late spring, it would have 60 or 70 kids running across it simultaneously, the whole structure shaking and rattling with the weight of all that small person energy. The parents mostly gathered in a shaded area along the edge of the parking lot. A row of benches and a few picnic tables under some old oak trees. They chatted with each other. They checked their phones. They watched the playground in that general, ambient way that parents do in a space that feels comprehensively safe, monitoring the overall energy, not tracking each individual child second by second. I was 6 years old, a small, trusting, completely ordinary 6-year-old with no framework yet for understanding that a stranger's smile could mean anything other than friendliness. That is the most important thing I can tell you about what happened next. Not the woman's approach, not the parking lot, not the station wagon. Those details matter, but they only make sense if you start from the fundamental truth that at 6, you have not yet developed the mental architecture to question an adult's authority. Adults are, by default, trustworthy. Adults know things you don't. When an adult tells you something, the adult is telling the truth. This is not a character flaw. It's just what 6 looks like. It was a Saturday in late April. The park was full. I had been running back and forth across one of the open platform sections near the top of the structure. Just running for the sake of running, the way kids do. Expending the kind of energy that seems bottomless at that age. When a woman appeared in my path and stopped me. She was probably in her mid-50s, short gray hair, neatly kept, wearing a beige cardigan over a floral print shirt. She had glasses with small wire frames. She had the kind of face that looks naturally pleasant, soft around the eyes, the corners of her mouth already tilting upward before she'd said anything. She crouched down to my level, the way adults do when they want to seem less enormous, and she started telling me how cute I was, how much she loved my hair. She had a very warm voice, gentle and unhurried, and she spoke to me the way adults speak to children they actually like, rather than children they're merely tolerating. Then she said, "Your mommy had to leave, sweetheart. She told me to take you home." 6-year-old brain, processing this information. I looked around. I couldn't see my mother from where I was standing. She'd been at the bench area, and there were too many people and too much structure between me and there for me to have a clear view. The woman's explanation was internally consistent. My mom had needed to leave. She told this nice woman to take me. These things made sense together. in the way that information makes sense when you're 6, and the person delivering it is an adult with a calm voice and a kind face. I took her hand. I remember the heat coming off the asphalt in the parking lot, that wavy, visible heat that Georgia parking lots generate on warm spring days. I remember thinking the woman's hand felt dry and cool despite the temperature. She walked me toward the back of the lot, moving quickly but not running, talking to me in a light, conversational way as we walked, about the playground, about whether I had a favorite part of it, about nothing in particular. The station wagon was parked near the far end of the lot, old and brownish beige, with wood panel trim along the sides and a back window that was slightly fogged. A man was sitting in the driver's seat. He turned to look at me when we approached. He smiled, a large, immediate smile, a smile that was working a little too hard. She opened the back door. I got in. The moment the door closed, everything shifted. The man's smile disappeared. He turned to the woman and started speaking in a low, tight voice, not quite whispering, not quite normal speech, the precise register adults use when they're having a serious conversation they don't want children to hear. I couldn't make out the words. I could make out the emotion. Tension, disagreement, something that made the air inside the car feel sharp. I sat very still in the back seat. I was beginning to feel something that I didn't have language for at 6, but would understand completely at 7 or 9 or 12. The specific sensation of something being wrong, of a situation that doesn't fit the shape of what you were told it would be. He started the car, reversed fast, pulled into the lane moving toward the exit too quickly, the way people drive when they're angry, or in a hurry, or both. We got to the traffic light at the park exit, red. A horn blared from directly behind us. I turned around and looked through the back window. My mother's station wagon, my mother's face, visible through her windshield, already recognizing the back of my head through the rear window of the car in front of her. I watched her face process what she was seeing. I watched the recognition happen. I watched her reach for her horn. The man floored it. He blew through the red light at speed, and I felt the car accelerate beneath me in a way that made my stomach drop. From the back seat, I had a clear view through the rear window, and I watched my mother's car getting smaller as we moved away from her and then disappearing as he turned at the next corner without slowing down. I started screaming. I don't remember making the decision. The screaming was simply there, fully formed, my body responding to something. My brain was still half a second behind on processing. Tears and noise and animal panic, completely beyond my control. The woman in the passenger seat turned around and said something to me, but I couldn't hear her over myself. He drove for what felt like a long time, but was probably no more than 3 minutes. Then he pulled the car over hard, onto a residential street I didn't recognize, lined with houses that all had their curtains drawn. He turned around. I don't remember the details of his face. I've tried to reconstruct it over the years, and I can't. Just the general shape of a man in his 60s, heavy-set, a short-sleeved shirt, and an expression that was neither kind nor threatening, but simply done. Finished with something. He told me to get out. I opened the door. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. I was still crying, my whole body shaking in the way that happens when you've been frightened down to the cellular level. The station wagon pulled away. I stood there on an empty sidewalk in a neighborhood I'd never been in, crying, watching it go. My mother's car came around the corner 30 seconds later. She had followed them, had run the same red light they had kept them in sight long enough to see them turn, had come around the corner to find me standing on the sidewalk outside a house with a mailbox shaped like a yellow lab. She was out of the car before it fully stopped. She ran to me and grabbed me and held on with both arms, and I could feel her shaking. I could feel the specific quality of adult panic, the effort to hold it together while something inside is coming completely apart. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She just held on. It was 2001. She had left her cell phone at home. In the time it took us to get back to the park and find a phone to call the police from, too much time had passed. No plate number, an unclear description, a car that was already who knows where. The investigation went nowhere. I don't know who that woman was. I don't know what would have happened if my mother hadn't been pulling out of her parking spot at that exact moment and looked up and seen the back of my head in a car that wasn't ours. I was 6 years old. I walked to that station wagon because a stranger asked me to. I think about this every time I'm at a playground. Every single time. I think about the way that woman smiled at me, and I think about how completely reasonable her explanation sounded, and I think about how the entire event hinged on a 6-year-old's reasonable assumption that adults could be trusted. I think about how easy it was. Something in the backyard. Let me tell you what 3 in the morning sounds like in a quiet Tennessee neighborhood when everything is how it should be. Crickets. Occasionally a car going past on the main road 2 blocks over. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen downstairs. Your kid's white noise machine, audible if you're standing just outside their door. That's it. That's the whole catalog. So when something else enters that catalog, when a sound appears in the 3 a.m. mix that shouldn't be there, your sleeping brain catches it in a way that nothing else wakes you. It's not the alarm clock. It's not your phone. It's the wrongness of an unknown sound in a space that should only contain known ones. I'm a single dad. 3 years now since the divorce. My son Caleb is 5, an all-in, full-commitment, genuinely joyful kid who runs everywhere and has never once in his life walked past a puddle without stepping in it. He's the best person I know, which is a strange thing to say about a 5-year-old, but is completely accurate. 8 months ago, we moved to a rental in Clarksville, a decent 3-bedroom house with a yard that's a little overgrown but has good bones and a nice big oak in the back corner that Caleb has already decided he's going to build a fort in when he's old enough. The previous tenants left behind a wooden playground set. Not fancy. A basic frame with a regular swing, a tire swing on a separate chain, and a wide plastic slide. Caleb claimed this slide within 20 minutes of us moving in and has not relinquished his claim. I started hearing things about 6 weeks after we moved in. The first time, a Tuesday night, or more accurately a Wednesday morning, at roughly 2:15 a.m. by the clock on my nightstand. I came awake from a dead sleep to the sound of the tire swing, that specific creak and spin sound, the one I've heard every afternoon for 8 months, while Caleb treats it like a centrifuge experiment. I lay there in the dark and listened to it for several seconds before getting up. I went to Caleb's room first. He was asleep, one arm wrapped around Gerald, his stuffed alligator, his face mashed sideways into the pillow the way children sleep when they have absolutely no concerns in the world. I stood in his doorway for a moment, holding onto the frame. If Caleb was in bed, something else was making that tire swing move. I went downstairs, clicked on the back porch light, and looked out through the glass panel in the back door before opening it. The yard appeared empty. I unlocked the door and stepped out onto the porch. The tire swing was rotating, slowly with the particular heavy motion of something that had recently had weight in it, gradually winding down. The way it moves when a child gets off and it still has momentum left. I walked down the porch steps and crossed the yard. I stopped next to the swing and watched it complete 2 more slow rotations and gradually still. There was nobody there. The gate on the back fence was closed. I walked the perimeter of the yard, checking all 4 sections of fence, checking the gate latch. Everything was as it should have been. I went back inside. I told myself, wind or an animal or some mechanical quality of the chain responding to temperature. I went to sleep. The second night, a Thursday, 11 days later, I woke up to different sounds. Footsteps on the slide. That hollow, repeating thump of feet on plastic, back and forth, and alongside it, laughter. Child's laughter, light and uncomplicated. This time I didn't go straight outside. I went to the bedroom window that overlooks the backyard and looked out first. The yard was lit reasonably well by the moon, bright enough to see the slide, the swing set, the tire swing, the wooden frame. Nobody was there, but I could still hear it. I stood at the window for a full 30 seconds, and I could hear the footsteps and the laughter while looking directly at a yard that contained nothing but the lawn and the playground structure and the oak tree in the corner. Then I went outside, and the sounds stopped the instant I opened the back door. I walked every inch of that yard. I checked the fence. I checked the gate on both sides. I looked up into the oak tree. I went back to bed without an explanation. For several nights after that, nothing. I began sleeping through again. Caleb had a good week at daycare, a painting that came home depicting what he described as a robot butterfly monster, which I framed and put in the kitchen. Life felt normal. Then came the knock. Friday night, well after midnight. I was in that warm, half-awake state where you're still mostly asleep but vaguely processing the sounds around you. 3 knocks on my bedroom window, clear, deliberate, evenly spaced. The unmistakable cadence of someone knocking on a door, except on a second-floor window of a house with no balcony. I sat up, fully awake, instantly. I sat in the dark for what I now believe was close to 60 seconds, completely motionless, conducting an internal debate about whether I had actually heard that, whether I had been dreaming, whether windows knocked by themselves for reasons I hadn't encountered yet. I was not dreaming. I got out of bed and walked to the window and looked out. Both swings were moving. Not the kind of slow rotation the tire swing does when it's winding down. Actual back and forth swinging. The pendulum motion that requires someone to push off. Both of them at the same time in sync, the way 2 children might swing together. And under the sound of the chains, laughter. That same light, uncomplicated child's laughter I'd heard before. I went downstairs in about 8 seconds. Out the back door in 10. The laughter stopped. What didn't stop was the figure. There was something at the top of the playground, on the upper platform at the highest point of the wooden structure, looming over the railing, tall enough that it was visible above the level of the railing from where I was standing at the base. It wasn't moving. It was looking at me. I have never in my adult life experienced the specific sensation of courage, simply draining out of you like water. In that moment, standing in my own backyard at midnight, looking at something that should not have been on my son's playground, I understood that phrase physically. Courage became something I used to have. I went back inside. Locked both locks, called 911, stood at the kitchen window with all the lights off and watched the playground until I saw headlights at the front of the house. The responding officer was thorough. He walked the yard carefully, checked the fence line, looked for any indication of how someone might have gotten in or out. He found nothing. No gate disturbed, no section of fence damaged, no obvious point of entry. He took my statement, asked if I'd been under stress recently, handed me a report number. The playground was empty by the time he arrived, 23 minutes after I'd called. 2 nights later, another knock on the window. I didn't go outside. I've ordered security cameras, wide-angle infrared night vision, motion-triggered, covering the full yard from 2 different angles. They arrived this week. I'm not sleeping well. Caleb is fine, completely unbothered, going about his 5-year-old business entirely unaware that his father is spending increasing amounts of the night sitting at the kitchen window in the dark, watching a playground. I'll update this when the cameras are set up. I'll share what they capture. I just hope it's something simple. I just hope it's something that makes sense. 10 feet from my window. This is the one I've never told in full. Not to my parents as a teenager, not to friends since, not to anyone really. Partly because the part that scared me most isn't the figure on the swing. It's the 2 seconds after I looked out the window. Those 2 seconds are the part I've never been able to set down entirely. I was 13. We lived on Ridgecrest Lane in a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina, a calm residential street in a neighborhood that was, by any reasonable measure, safe. 2-story houses with attached garages, well-lit streets, a neighborhood watch sign on every 3rd corner. The kind of street where you know your neighbors' last names and their dogs' first names. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, at the front of the house. My window faced the street, and directly across the street, 40 feet, maybe slightly more, was a small neighborhood park. Not much to it. A swing set with 2 regular swings and a tire swing, a basketball half-court with a single bent hoop, a concrete path that made a loop through the grass, and a couple of wooden benches along the path. Nothing impressive. Just a park. During the day, I looked across at it and thought nothing of it. At night, I usually closed my curtains before bed. But on this particular night in late May, I didn't, because the weather had been hot all day. That heavy, damp, pre-summer heat that settles into North Carolina in late spring like it's planning to stay. And I had my window open for the air. Even the curtains felt like too much. I'd gone to bed around 10. I was reading for a while, then not reading, then occupying that half-asleep zone where thoughts drift, but you're still vaguely tethered to the room around you. Sometime after midnight, the clock on my dresser said 12:43 when I eventually looked at it. I became aware of a sound. Soft, rhythmic, repetitive, a squeaking. The specific quality of a metal swing chain under load, moving back and forth in a regular arc. I lay there and listened to it for probably 2 minutes before I decided it was annoying enough to investigate. I rolled over toward the window and looked out. The streetlight outside my house was one of those old sodium vapor types, the ones that give off an orange-yellow light rather than the white light of newer LEDs. It cast everything in that particular warm, slightly unreal glow, the kind that makes ordinary objects look like they're part of a painting. In that light, I could see the swing set across the street. Someone was sitting on one of the swings. My first thought was just, person on a swing. Weird hour, but teenagers did that. I almost rolled back over. I almost wrote it off entirely and went back to the edge of sleep. Then I noticed where they were looking. Most people, when they swing, look forward. They look at where they're going. Or they tilt their head back and look at the sky. Or they look at their own feet. It's a physical activity with a natural direction of attention. The person on the swing wasn't doing any of those things. They were completely still from the torso up, not moving with the swing, their body rigid while the seat moved beneath them, and they were looking directly across the street, at my window, at me. I went completely still. The room was dark. There was no light on, no reason to think they could see me specifically. Just a dark rectangle of window in a dark house. Logically, I knew they probably couldn't tell I was there. Logically, this was just a person at a park, looking in a general direction. But logic was working very slowly at 12:43 in the morning, after the visual of that completely motionless figure sitting in an occupied swing while staring across a street. I pulled back from the window until I was below the sill. Slowly, without making any sudden movement, like something prey-shaped does when it wants to become invisible. I sat on the floor of my own bedroom with my back against the wall beneath the window, listening to the squeaking continue. Back and forth. Back and forth. Regular as a metronome, never speeding up, never slowing down, completely mechanically consistent. I thought about going to my parents' room. It was across the hall, maybe 20 feet. But crossing the hall meant passing the top of the stairs. And from the top of the stairs, if the streetlight was at the right angle, you might be briefly visible through the side light panels beside the front door. I didn't want to be visible from the street. I couldn't make my legs do it. So I crawled back to my bed, got in, pulled the blanket up, and covered my ears. The squeaking went on. I don't know how long I lay there. Long enough that my eyes adjusted fully to the dark, and I could see the shapes of everything in my room without any real effort. Long enough that the squeaking became a kind of background texture, almost ordinary. Long enough that I started, slowly, reluctantly, to think, maybe I'm making this into something it isn't. Maybe it's just someone out late who happens to be looking in my general direction. Maybe I'm 13 and lying in the dark, amplifying something that's nothing. The squeaking stopped. I lay still and counted. 30 seconds. 60. My hands unclenched slightly. My breathing settled. If I went to the window and the swing was empty, I could exhale. I could know they were gone. I could turn over and go back to sleep and be embarrassed about this in the morning. I got up. I moved toward the window carefully, staying low out of habit, stepping over the creaky floorboard near my desk. I came up along the left side of the window frame so that only the side of my face and one eye were exposed to the street. The swing was empty, and the person who had been on it was standing on the sidewalk directly in front of my house. Not across the street. Not at the edge of the park. On my side of the street, on the concrete in front of our yard, looking straight up at my window. Maybe 10 feet away. Maybe slightly less. Close enough that the streetlight was hitting their face directly. Close enough that I could see the face, not reconstruct it, not estimate it, actually see it. The specific shape of a face looking upward with intention, the eyes catching the orange light, the neck craned back at exactly the angle that means they know precisely where to look. I registered the face. For 1 second, 2 at most, they were looking at my window and I was looking at them and we both knew it. Then I ran. I didn't care about noise or about stepping on the creaky floorboard, or about my parents' reaction. I ran across the hall screaming my father's name at a volume that I'm confident was audible from the street. His light came on. He met me in the hallway. He looked out the front window. He went outside and walked the property for 5 minutes. When he came back in, his expression was the particular expression of a parent who has found something they're trying to decide how much to tell their kid. There was nobody there. But under the swing set, in a patch of soft ground where the grass had worn away, there were boot prints. Fresh boot prints, damp and well-defined, leading from the base of the swings toward the street, toward the house. My dad locked the front door and told me to keep my window closed for a while. I kept it closed for the rest of the year. I've gone back and forth over the years about how to think about what happened that night. There's a version of it that's simple. Someone was at the park, Someone walked across the street. It was probably a neighborhood teenager, and the whole thing was much more ordinary than it felt at 13 in the dark. I don't fully believe that version. I believe it enough to get through the day, but not enough to forget those 2 seconds at the window. The specific quality of being seen by someone who was looking for you. The speed at which they'd crossed the street in the time I'd been on the floor with my hands over my ears. 10 feet. Maybe 8. That's what I can't put down. Not the face. I don't remember the face clearly anymore. But the distance. The understanding of how much distance had closed while I was hiding. 4 stories. 4 different states. 4 different people who were somewhere that felt safe, at a time when they thought they were alone. They weren't alone. That's the through line here, and it's not a comfortable one. Parks and playgrounds are public spaces. They're built for communities. They're designed to feel open and safe and familiar. And they are. Mostly, almost always, they are. But public means available to everyone. And everyone includes people you would not choose to share that space with. The teenagers at the midnight park. The 6-year-old at the Saturday playground. The single dad in the house with the backyard swing set. The 13-year-old at the bedroom window. None of them did anything wrong. None of them were careless or foolish. They were simply in a familiar place, at a familiar time. And someone else knew it. There are things that can protect you. Paying attention to sounds that seem wrong. Looking up when your instinct says to. Not assuming that because a space feels safe, it is. Teaching children, carefully at the right age, in age-appropriate language, that adults they don't know are not automatically trustworthy, regardless of how kind they seem. These aren't paranoid thoughts. They're just the version of the world that contains all of the information, rather than only the comfortable parts. Stay aware. Trust the part of your brain that says something is off before you can explain why. And the next time you hear squeaking in the dark outside your window, really stop before you write it off. Look out. See who's there.